Hello, welcome to my video series on basic sociology. The next 5 videos are all concerned with various aspects of what sociologists term socialization. I suppose originally a jargon word, but one which has now become part of everyday English. This present video will look at primary socialization in children, and then the subsequent videos will examine other aspects of socialization, the development of the self, and the various agencies of socialization. For sociologists, socialization is the process whereby we learn how to behave like human beings in a human society. Most human behavior is learnt through the process of socialization. Little of what we do is instinctual. So we learn from our families and friends, and later from schools and other social institutions, how they expect us to behave. When we are born, we are helpless and speechless infants. But through socialization, we gradually become self-aware and knowledgeable individuals who are more or less skillful in the ways of the culture into which we are born. Properly speaking, socialization continues throughout our lives as a lifelong process, but it is particularly crucial during childhood, when the developing individual learns both the basic patterns of behavior, which we think of as applying to all normal human beings, notably language and being able to have relationships with other people, the particular cultural patterns of approved behavior in our own society, for example, how to eat and dress politely, and our sense of self. As small children, we also begin to learn that different people are expected to behave differently depending on their particular social roles. For example, quite commonly, that little boys and little girls are different and are subject to different expectations and ways of being treated in our particular society. We continue to learn particular social roles for the rest of our lives, perhaps going from school student to work roles to the roles of husband or wife, parent, grandparent, retiree, and so on. Again, some may have to learn such roles as being unemployed or being a refugee. Sociologists distinguish between these two aspects of socialization, referring to the initial socialization of the individual into social life as primary socialization, and the process of learning particular social roles as secondary socialization. Note that at a conceptual level, these two are quite distinct. Primary socialization is a fundamental and defining experience of life for almost every human being. Although there are significant differences between individual experiences of primary socialization, to a considerable extent, it is a common process for individuals within a particular society, and even to some degree more generally for all human beings across all societies. By contrast, secondary socialization differentiates one individual from another, in that our social roles make us different from each other. Again, primary socialization is concentrated in early childhood, whereas secondary socialization continues throughout life. The importance of socialization for human beings reflects the extreme immaturity of newborn infants. As noted in my video on human beings as social beings, human infants are dependent on other members of their species for their physical survival for a lengthy period of time, a situation which leads to the learning corollary. That is, because of our physical immaturity as infants, humans are capable of an enormous amount of learning as we mature. Obversely, instinct plays a less significant role in the development of the behavior of human infants compared to the majority of animals, even of other mammalian species. This does not mean that we lack instincts or inherited traits, merely that these instincts and traits are always shaped by experience and learning, including socialization. In this regard, nature and nurture are intertwined. Language acquisition is a major example of this. All physically normal children possess the innate ability to learn language, but the particular language or languages that they acquire depend entirely on whatever languages are spoken by their family members or in their local neighborhood. Although not unique to us as a species, socialization is particularly important for human beings. In childhood, this involves both the primary aspect of socialization, whereby we learn human behaviors, and the secondary aspects concerning specific social roles, most obviously gender-specific roles, which are already being assimilated at an early age. In terms of primary socialization, children will normally learn the following: to interact with their particular caregivers, normally, but not always, their immediate family, to eat and drink according to the patterns of the local culture, to control their bodily functions, particularly urination and defecation, again according to the patterns of the local culture, to use language, to dress themselves, and to follow the cultural norms of the local culture. There are a small number of unsocialized children, who I will talk about in the next video, who do not learn these basics. We should note that the social roles of children have varied a great deal, both historically and between different sections of the population. Thus, richer social groups in modern societies have become accustomed to the idea of an extended childhood, and also often an extended adolescence, in which the child continues to be looked after and have no social function other than go to school or college. This is both an historical and social anomaly, of course. Throughout history, and for poorer social groups today, children have been set to work as soon as they are able, whether as low-level farm hands or as assistants and trainees in craft and industrial production. The spread of basic universal schooling has profoundly altered the nature of childhood in the relatively recent past. But we should remember that even today, large numbers of children still have to work, including in such activities as begging and being a child soldier, experiences presumably unimaginable to most of the listeners of this video. Although acquiring local cultural knowledge is fundamental to socialization, socialization is not mere cultural programming. The child does not passively absorb the influences it is subjected to, but from earliest infancy onwards makes demands that affect the behavior of those responsible for its care. Correspondingly, parents and other caregivers are not uniform in the ways they raise children. I will discuss this in a future video. There are therefore important differences between individual children, many of which have been investigated by child and educational psychologists. Although most of these are beyond a purely sociological account, I will mention them briefly here. Some are obviously of far more sociological interest than others. The basic pattern of children's physical development and growth has been studied extensively for a long time now, and the main developmental milestones identified, including, for example, the approximate ages at which children are able to sit up by themselves, to walk unaided, or to become able to make the fine control movements needed to pick up a small object between thumb and forefinger. Similarly, the stages of initial language acquisition are clearly established, and even the main stages of the development of thinking widely agreed. These latter were first identified by the Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget on the basis of the child's biological maturation and progressive experience of the world, although there's continuing debate about how universal his final stage, the ability to think critically and abstractly, actually is. I will talk about these ideas in a future series of videos. After Piaget, Lawrence Kohlberg developed his ideas to propose stages in the development of moral thinking. Far more controversial are ideas about the development of personality. Famous among non-psychologists, the work of Sigmund Freud remains controversial among psychologists and psychiatrists, many rejecting it outright. Basically, Freud believed that children go through a series of stages of personality development, beginning with the instinctual and antisocial drives of the id, whereby which it already possesses as a baby, then the emergence of the individual's sense of self, the ego, with its ability to control the id, and later by the development of the moral regulation of the superego. Problems in the development of these aspects of the self led to difficulties in dealing with challenges in adult life. A similar, but far more sociological account of the tension between individual desires and social demands was later suggested by George Herbert Mead. Again, I'll talk about this in another video. Apart from Mead, none of these thinkers were sociological in orientation, preferring to understand the development of the child in terms of biology and internal maturational challenges. Other psychologists propose theories which can more obviously be integrated within a sociological outlook. However, notably Alfred Adler and Martin Seligman. Adler was a one-time associate of Freud who disagreed sharply with him about what he saw as Freud's obsession with sexuality as a motor of psychodynamic development. Instead, Adler developed his own system for understanding the problems of human psychology and their cure. For Adler, individuals develop their own characteristic style of life based on a guiding self-ideal, so that they would then try to realize their personal objectives in their particular social context, including sibling relationships. Success enabled them to develop fulfilling social ties with others, pursue an occupation, and perhaps find love and marriage. Lack of success could lead to neurosis, delinquency, or even psychosis. Parents could damage their child's development either through severe neglect or excessive pampering of the child, the former leading the child to angrily seek revenge against society, and the latter to a lack of empathy for others and a self-centered desire that other people conform to their wishes. Also important for Adler was the sense of physical or social inferiority felt by some children, which was sometimes carried through to later life. This could lead to a sense of failure, but might also lead to the child striving to develop their own strengths, to overcome the perceived inferiority, or even to overcompensation, as when insecure men acted aggressively to try and prove their masculinity. Similarly, in a social world in which women were treated as social inferiors, they might too respond either with extreme submissiveness or by their own equivalent of masculine protest. For more details on Adler's work, see my videos on him. Seligman's work is congruent with this approach. Briefly, initially on the basis of animal studies, he developed the concept of learned helplessness to describe the state in which an experimental animal could be reduced if it was exposed to repeated unpleasant stimuli from which it could not escape, such as electric shocks in his experimental work. It would eventually acquiesce in its suffering and no longer even try to escape it. Applying this concept to human beings provided a seeming explanation for the apathy of many victims of violence and poverty towards their fate, or the lack of effort by those who had come to see themselves as educational failures. They had given up their struggle with life. It was possible to counter such helplessness, however, and Seligman later advocated programs by which individuals could develop what he called learned optimism and exercise control over their particular situation. Thank you for listening. If you like these videos, you are welcome to subscribe to my channel. I will try to answer any questions you may have about this video in a future one. By the way, those who want to support the development of the channel can do so through Patreon or PayPal. I will give details below the video. You can click the like button if you want, so that I can get an idea of which videos are of greatest interest to viewers. Have a good day.